Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Barr, a product manager at Optimizely. Today, we'll be discussing how to navigate competing priorities as a product manager. You'll walk away from today's talk with tools for transforming cross-functional friction into impact in your product. And in particular, we'll focus on why democratizing experimentation across teams is key to customer satisfaction, tips for teams who are building and working with in-house A/B testing solutions, and how to implement an enterprise-level data platform. Here's a bit about me. I am a recent San Francisco transplant from New York. I'm getting used to the weather and the pace of life out here, which has been fun to explore. I'm also a hobby ceramicist, so I'm very interested in creative forms within structure. And if that sounds a bit like my day job, that's because it is. As a product manager on the data platform at Optimizely, I work deeply with data and the infrastructure that supports its collection, processing, and delivery. Data is critical to the success of our business and our customers' businesses. And my team and I are focused on providing companies with the data and tools they need to make informed and impactful product decisions throughout the experimentation lifecycle. So let's double click on the topics I'll be covering today. We'll start with the need for experimentation across your organization. Where does A/B testing fit in, and how can it help different teams with different priorities better execute on their goals? Next, we'll discuss my experience building an internal experimentation platform at Conde Nast, which came with a whole host of challenges navigating business, product, and technical requirements. Bit of a spoiler here, we weren't quite able to solve for them all, but we learned a lot in the process, which I'll share a bit about. I'll go into how that brought me to Optimizely and the robust solutions that a fully dedicated organization can bring to an end-to-end experimentation product in terms of scale and functionality, and end with how my experiences can save your company time and energy as you grow through the progressive delivery and experimentation process. So how do we influence product success? Cross-functional alignment is essential to bringing successful products to market. At a technology organization, product management is uniquely positioned to reach various functions of the business and balance those functions against one another as new products and features are developed. Product managers gather requirements and feature requests from the business, build an understanding of technical feasibility and timeline from technology partners, and facilitate user research and product usability feedback loops with designers. But at the end of the day, the product roadmap is driven by product managers who are accountable for its success or failure and therefore hold decision-making power over it. The decisions made by product managers hugely impact the work and processes implemented by other teams. So it's important that these decisions are made using data-backed intuition. You hear a lot about data-driven decision-making and gut-based decision-making, but product managers really need a balance of both tools. So how does experimentation impact these spheres of influence? Well, experimentation is highly valuable to the PM at the center of this. It exists in support of that balance between what you think and feel is right and what the data tells you is right. Product manager who runs experiments is able to move fast and iterate faster with their team, meaning they can solve the right problems and get to that right user experience with a lot more confidence. And a product manager who believes in the power of experimentation is positioned to bring that experimentation mindset to the rest of the company. So when a marketer or designer comes to you and requests some new feature be rolled out by next week, you can say, here's a process for us to work together to determine what the actual problem is you're trying to solve and determine how to test possible solutions for it rather than jumping to execute on that first, maybe most obvious solution. So progressive delivery and experimentation are key to strategy alignment across these groups and ultimately key to the success of your product. So what are some of these cross-functional needs for experimentation? The product teams who are winning in today's world are taking into account both the needs of engineering and the needs of business and design teams. They are rolling out every new component, every API version upgrade, every new web caching mechanism as a test, as well as testing features of those components like design and copy with different audiences. Experimentation is performed on both fundamental and incremental product changes to discover and inform on the wider impact of change. And I like to use the analogy of big rocks and small rocks to think about the way an experimentation program can be built across an organization. Net new features and user flows are disruptive and have inherent risk built into them. These are big changes and are most important to roll out as product experiments. These are where experimentation can provide the most value in terms of immediate user feedback and risk mitigation. And as an example, if you think about, Twitter moving to a 280 character limit as an increase from 140, or Instagram pushing out a new algorithmically updating feed as a shift from their purely chronological feed, it was incredibly important for these teams to roll out these changes slowly to targeted groups. Even so, there was enormous pushback from their users, but they were able to control the story by letting groups of users adjust to the changes at different rates. And ultimately, those ended up being the right product decisions. So the other set of experiments a successful product team needs to run are incremental changes to product features. So these are our small rocks, and these experiments can reach statistical significance much more quickly and be run with higher frequency and with larger audiences because they are optimizations to an existing feature. They help a team iterate really quickly on design and hone in on that ideal user experience. And you need both these small rocks and these big rocks to run a good experimentation program. You can't fill your roadmap bucket of experiments with small rocks right away, or those big rocks won't fit. And you won't reap the larger reward of experimentation at the end of your planning timeline. Big rocks have to be prioritized and space has to be made for them. And all the room around them can be filled with these small rock optimizations that are run more ad hoc. So broadly speaking, this Venn diagram is where we see these types of rocks falling, right? More of these big rocks land with technology, more small rocks with business and design, with a lot of overlap in the middle for things like revamping entire user workflows and things like that. But really the idea here is that not everything engineers want to run experiments on should require oversight from the business. And not everything business and design teams want to run experiments on should require the help of engineers. The best experimentation platform allows for each group to operate independently or collaboratively without interrupting any group's productivity. So once you've established this, you get to focus on experiment design and execution, which is the fun part. So how do we think about designing experiments and moving through the experimentation lifecycle? Well, to start with, we test our assumptions by approaching product problems with hypotheses wherever possible. If I make this change, I expect X% increase in weekly clicks or Y number of new signups per day. And these hypotheses can be made based on qualitative user surveys or marketplace evaluation or simple painted door tests. Once our initial concepts are validated, we go a step further to build and release features in frequent and gradual rollouts, which can be accomplished through feature flagging and environment-specific testing. And then at this point, it's important that we have the right metrics set up for our experiment to help us quantify product impact. What does success look like for this feature? How does my team define user engagement? How does my team define return on investment? If net sales are more important than total sales, how does that metric get instrumented and fed back into the experiment? And we can leverage data-driven processes here to discover the best possible versions of our products and measure the real impact they have on our businesses. So a lot of companies we see get stuck in that build stage. This is what deploying continuously and releasing confidently looks like for us. So I mentioned gradual rollouts. This is crucial for delivering better products and managing your stakeholders. Rolling out new features gradually and as an A/B test is where close collaboration with your counterparts in engineering really matters. By embedding feature flagging into product development workflows, code deployments are decoupled from releases, meaning that anyone on the team can manage how and when features are rolled out, configured, targeted, and tested. This empowers your entire organization to take measured risks and innovate safely. And this process will come up again in a few minutes when we talk about developing an experimentation platform in its entirety. This build phase is where we spend most of our time with an MVP product. So let's dive into an example of how cross-functional needs for experimentation were prioritized by the data platform team at Conde Nast. For context, Conde is a media company that owns about 24 print magazines and digital sites, including The New Yorker, GQ, Vanity Fair, Vogue, Bon Appetit. Editorial teams there operate independently of one another, but the core infrastructure behind all the websites is the same and is managed by a centralized technology organization. Now, when I was on the data platform team at Conde, we made the decision to swap out a vendor product by developing our own recommendations engine for readers of the websites. These recommendations would populate in carousels and modules across the site with recommended content for users. And at the time, we were also building out a new data science team, and they had developed several models for us that took a corpus of content and a sample article, and were able to recommend other articles that were similar to the sample or trending across the site or about to be trending across the site or personalized to you based on your browsing history with the magazine. So as we were developing this product, what we realized was that we needed an easy way to test our recommendations assumptions without embedding them in code. We needed to experiment on three main things here. So first and foremost, because we were replacing a vendor, we needed these recommendations to outperform the vendor recommendations in terms of user engagement, which we define in a number of different ways across the company. There would be no point in advancing with the internal recommendations engine if the vendor could do it better. And so that was really our primary goal. Second, we needed to test out each of these recommendation algorithms that the data science team was building against one another. And we would do this evenly across the entire readership. And that would really help inform the development of the models themselves and serve as valuable input to the data scientists working on tracking and predicting user engagement. And then third, we needed the ability to easily swap out the recommendations for a particular reader based on which magazine they were browsing, whether they were looking at a sidebar circulation unit or an end of article one, whether they were a first-time or returning reader, desktop or mobile, and a whole set of other criteria that might affect whether a user clicks through to that next article in their browser session. So as it turns out, when I started having conversations with other parts of the business about experimentation, it became apparent that this was a much larger issue than previously anticipated. Many teams were seeking this type of functionality, but we narrowed those needs down to three main groups who would be its biggest beneficiaries: marketing, product and design, and engineering. So for marketers, their main goal was increasing reader subscription rates year over year. They tested out a couple of different A/B testing vendors and had run these experiments, on and off over the previous few years, but nothing had really stuck. And so what they're looking for in an experimentation program was ways for them to measure and track immediate revenue increases based on user behavior. The next group is product and design. Their main goal is increasing user engagement on the websites. So as I mentioned, this is tracked in a number of ways, through time spent on site, pages per session, visitor loyalty, which is 4 more visits per month. But their goal here is to create the perfect user experience on site. And then the third group here is engineering, and their goal is really to roll out new features and components safely and reliably. And they had a way to solve this on the fly internally, but there was very little visibility into it and very little ways for them to orchestrate across different teams and applications. Another group that we did end up speaking with was the editorial teams. And though they were definitely interested in experimentation for things like headline testing and configurable features of the content management system, these were nice to have experiments and less critical to the day-to-day requirements of their job. So we really were able to prioritize these 3 groups, marketing, product and design, and engineering, as our primary use case generators for A/B testing. So really what we were seeing was that there was a shared problem space across the company and a clear gap that needed filling. Each group came upon the need for experimentation separately, but were interested in using data to drive their decision-making process. Some teams were looking to run these big rock experiments, some small rocks. The marketing team notably used a spreadsheet to manage dozens of these small copy and placement tests that they'd brainstormed over the previous year to run on different types of users, but they didn't have a good way or a consistent way to execute. And there were varying levels of success running these types of experiments in the existing ecosystem. Hard-coded tests had been written into the front-end application. Free trials with A/B testing vendors had been piloted and abandoned. And all of these were really stopgap solutions to the more fundamental issue. And left hanging code and inconsistent measurement practices littered throughout the system. And so what we identified was that unification here was really key. We needed a sustainable method for running experiments. And our team, the data platform team, was well placed to drive this initiative with input from all the other teams at different levels of the stack. Now, so the biggest question, of course, is always build versus buy, and it's a really hard one. These are some of the factors we took into consideration. So one of the benefits of building in-house, your upfront cost is low. You are building the tool yourself, so it's as flexible as you want it to be. It's purpose-built for your use cases, and you get long-term control over the roadmap of that framework. Why would you buy a tool? Well, a lot of these features that we wanted to use were available out of the box with some of these vendors. With an enterprise solution, we would have full-time support teams available to us. We'd have guaranteed improvements to the product. We would not have to maintain any code, and it would be easier to scale the experimentation program across the board. And you can see from these pros lists that the reasons for buying an experimentation solution are compelling. For Conde, though, and for a lot of companies out there, spend is handled on the business side of the organization, which has little insight into the needs and efficiencies or lack thereof of the engineering organization. Budgets are pretty tightly controlled, especially if the proposed investment has no proven ROI and is not obviously required to continue operating, like AWS server costs might be. The other factor here was that we were given a lot of encouragement to help the company move away from vendors. We had, I'd have to say, hundreds of them in-house that served little to no continuous purpose, and the maintenance and oversight of these integrations was becoming a burden on all the teams. So we decided to build this product. And for us, the largest factors were lack of business spend and alignment on a company strategy for removing reliance on external services. So what was our approach to build? We broke this down into 3 phases for the initial product. First, we were reviewing open source A/B testing platforms and using the functionality available there as a launching point in the hopes that what was available right away would solve for 2/3 of the use cases for our primary audiences immediately. Second, once we decided on an open source platform, we would pull it in-house, solve for the smallest and base level test cases first, including those of our team, with time to market as a priority for early validation and data-driven iteration of the tool. And then last, we were solving the authorization and education story across the company and expanding the usage of the tool to less technical users. So you can see sort of through this timeline, the project itself, building an experimentation platform, was run kind of like an experiment. Our hypothesis was that the business as a whole would benefit from a unified experimentation platform, that our internal teams would be able to make better decisions using it, and that our end readers would have a better experience on site, which would lead to higher revenue for the company. We started to work on releasing small MVP features that we could iterate on quickly in our build phase, and then plan to measure and weigh internal user feedback and end user feedback before we expanded and optimized the platform for larger audiences. So some of the challenges that we ran into, there were a lot on the technical side. The biggest one was making sure the product was not brittle. Inexperienced users shouldn't be able to bring down the websites if they change a variation name or a variable in the user interface. And making that UI work seamlessly for internal testers was really challenging, especially when test experiments involved checks and overrides in multiple application code bases. We were also, at the time, building a new design system in-house. And so we were mapping experiment structures into that design system, and there was a lot of internal coordination and shifting that had to happen as both of these systems evolved. And then we had to get the results right. It's really hard to produce reliable, reusable stats for an experiment. We had to think about what mutual exclusion looked like in the space, how we analyze experiments that touch the same components, and how to advise the rest of the organization on proper experiment design, which are all really difficult questions that people have thought about for years, and we had to become experts on really quickly. And then on the organizational side, it was challenging to keep stakeholders happy and invested in the project. We were encouraging them to migrate from some of their hack solutions over to this new canonical product. And in the meantime, had to convince them that it would be worth their time and good for the business to beta test a less than perfect product throughout our development process. So how do we manage stakeholder expectations, those organizational problems throughout the MVP build? Well, you have to be transparent and upfront about project timelines and feature priorities. You need to provide context by giving stakeholders the big picture. You shouldn't just say no to a feature request or a proposed deadline. You should bring other teams along in your vision for the end product and explain why you're prioritizing certain features over others. People tend to be pretty receptive to that, and it ends up sort of helping your relationship with them as well and building trust. And then demonstrate progress. Give stakeholders ways to track your movement and your metrics around the project's success. So that can be done through regular meetings, Jira boards, status emails, or dashboards. Any of those work, it just has to be tangible and regular. So at the end of the day, what did we accomplish and what did we learn? Frankly, we weren't able to get done as much as we wanted in the 6-month MVP timeframe we set out for the initial product. A lot of the desired UI features were missing. The design system was only kind of half built around this new experimentation framework, and the experiment cadence was slower than we would have liked. That's not all bad. We had a lot of good things come out of it as well. We were able to successfully decouple experimentation systems from the application code. We were able to keep data storage, compute, and hosting costs low. And we'd built a centralized team for experimentation. There was a place for people to go to ask questions about how to set up A/B tests and feature flags and experiments, which is really good. Things that were not that great were that, the build time ended up being much more costly than anticipated. There were some limitations that were imposed by the open source tool that we chose to start with and build on top of that were difficult to get around. And then the team was somewhat of a bottleneck for experiment ramp up. So kind of the flip side of that centralized team pro there is the fact that we became, the only source for information on experimentation. And this one could be solved maybe by longer product life and education across the organization, but it was an initial damper on time to value for the product. So in the end, while we solved our recommendations engine use case and a handful of others for the business, we weren't able to integrate the tool deeply enough into our code to solve for our marketing and targeting use cases easily. I might have been better served by more fully exploring that buy option. So all in all, building that tool was a really great learning experience for me and got me interested in how to build a really full-featured end-to-end solution for progressive delivery and experimentation. We've solved a lot of these problems at scale at Optimizely. We've powered over 1 million experiments for hundreds of customers and have been able to broaden the influence of experimentation across entire organizations and in entire industries. We handle on the data platform over 6 billion events a day, continuously coming in from all parts of the world. And this number is growing exponentially. The amount of data we store in-house has increased, I think, about 3x in the last 3 years, and it's set to continue on that pattern as more and more people buy into experimentation and grow their experimentation mindsets across their company. And we really brought that cross-functional mindset to developing the experimentation platform at Optimizely. We're the leader in progressive delivery and experimentation. Our platform includes feature flags, progressive rollouts, and A/B tests. We help release software quickly and test and learn in production before rolling out to all users. And a big part of our value add and our differentiation in the market is that we put customers at the center of the product development and delivery process. Our platform is built for the entire team, from product managers to engineers to growth marketers to data analysts. Optimizely helps you move fast and get it right. And we help you deliver those products that your users love. So here's how we do it. With Optimizely, there are 2 ways that you can use experimentation to ensure you're building the products that deliver the highest value for your customers. 1, execute experiments in your application code. Optimizely Full Stack is designed for engineering product growth teams to test on every device, enabling server-side experimentation and managing functionality deeper in your product. And we also give you ways to execute experiments using a visual editor for your website. So you can test new ideas, designs, messaging on websites without relying on your developer teams. And this is huge for organizations that are focused on driving conversion rate optimization, personalization, and quick growth driving A/B tests. So it's pretty rare to find a fully featured platform that enables both of these big rock and small rock approaches to experimentation. Many companies, like my previous one, pour in tons of time and resources to building solutions in-house, but end up being unable to support the use cases of stakeholders from across the org without continued increasing investment. And it's not just Conde Nast that experiences this. Shama, the VP of Engineering at GitHub, made this statement at our most recent Opticon last month. GitHub went through the process of replacing their internal platform with Optimizely and have seen real and immediate benefits in terms of managing and scaling experimentation across their teams. So what are my key learnings? Whether you're building in-house or at an enterprise level. One, understand your stakeholder needs, right? What are the minimum viable features required to make an impact for your stakeholders? Find common ground between groups and prioritize accordingly. So try to focus in on the use cases that impact more teams internally and create and socialize a roadmap that highlights both in-flight work and work that's coming down the pike. Be realistic about resource constraints. And this one is huge. It's really hard to do. Even though we started not from zero, right? We started from an open source platform at Conde. There was still a large amount of work to get experiments launched and running using the new tooling and infrastructure. Think deeply about the amount of time you want to devote your engineers to infrastructure development versus application development. Infrastructure always takes more time than you think it will. And then track your project success in deliverables and usage. When you have a lot of stakeholders, you need ways to disseminate information to them and let them know you're continuing to work towards your shared goals, which really ties back to number one here, which is understanding those stakeholder needs. So if you're interested in learning more about my experiences or about Optimizely, check out our on-site resources or feel free to reach out to me directly. But thanks so much for having me, and please let me know if you have any questions.